Hello, everybody. This is the first session of what I like to label the disadvantaged adaptation series. Leading up to this, I was hosting what I dubbed neurodivergent learning sessions, which originally the catered audience was not just those that are neurodiverse, but people who really struggle with engaging with the world around them, information, other people, prioritizing aspects of life and like work and uh, well-being. And For some time, although I've met a number of people that are neurodiverse, a lot of them didn't seem to have the struggles I had that really made it challenging enough to warrant the motivation I had for starting the neurodivergent learning series for people who, are really struggling with engaging with information and coordinating and engaging with other people. Most people that I engaged with seem to more so struggle with the people skills as opposed to the capacity to like uh be successful in a working environment of some sort. um and just navigating through life with a de a well enough sense of independence where that um, they don't feel that they are necessarily unable to carry themselves and rely on themselves, and they're not necessarily in a position where they feel it's necessary to seek advocacy. But I felt like that this problem of feeling being put at a disadvantage is deeper and more inclusive than talking about neurodiversity, especially since I live in a neighborhood full of people that are in disadvantaged circumstances, based on, just their own journey through life. Uh, and I think it there's um, attention should be paid that is warranted to thinking about more holistically, um, communities of people that gone through other walks of life besides you know whether or not they're neurodiverse, um, is not necessarily what matters, but the fact that we're struggling in a way where we're not doing as well as maybe some or most people in our own circles, but it it has it's deeper than just talking about neurodivergence and struggling with people skills and engagement and functional skills. And that really was the motivation behind the transition from the neurodivergent learning series to what I like to call now the disadvantaged adaptation series. And especially given the direction with what's happening in the world around us, a lot of people are worried about the disruption in the market with AI and automation. And I think now is a pretty interesting time to especially spark these discussions to think about, well, what should we do if we don't find ourselves in a position to utilize the technologies that are out there. Is there going to be some kind of divide between those who have access to those resources because they have some kind of status, like whether it's inherited, or like people with money, they have access to technology that other people don't, and it's reasonable to worry about that when you're not in a good situation of your own, uh, managing the kind of access you have to the resources that make it so you are able to perform your best and in doing what you do to keep up with what you need to keep up with, whether you rely on certain types of technology or certain types of ways of strategizing how you go about day to day. Like something that sets you back from other people, or you feel personally that you need to work on something, or your community needs to work on something, and you want to address it. Um, and that's where I see this being a more extended dialogue than just talking about, being not different than somebody who doesn't struggle with neurodiverse uh, functioning. And like I said, just because somebody is neurodiverse doesn't mean they're really struggling as some people who might have developmental struggles that are also neurodiverse. That's kind of like a subset of people. But I think I've hit on most of the important talking points about why I think these sessions are useful and moving forward, like their importance, and why I felt was necessary to transition from like just talking about neurodiversity, even though it wasn't just a conversation about neurodiversity. I think it's even more important to have a conversation about, what it means to feel as if we're not really, I don't want to use the word marginalized, but we feel like we're at a disadvantage because of the circumstances that we're in. um, and not just working that out for ourselves, but how can we collectively have this conversation and share, our story and how we've gotten through certain circumstances, and now we're here, and sure we're dealing with problems and challenges, but maybe we made it past challenges in the past that held us back in some way, and it's worth sharing that story. And that's what I think this space is also useful for, is sharing that story. If you feel as if there's a lot of people around you that need to hear that story, and you feel that it's your responsibility to share that story. Because I think, if you feel that way, then I feel it's necessary to share that story. And maybe I can learn something, or maybe the way you present it, you have some kind of epiphany at the end of the day for doing that, and makes you realize something else. And then, you talk about that as well. And as with most of my sessions, and as with the neurodivergent learning series, this is a partnership. Uh, the partnership opportunity that I'm doing through the Active Inference Institute. And taking the lens of active inference, I usually press upon this idea of how we perceive, like this capacity of perceiving and engaging with the world around us, and how and this idea of adaptation as well, like, how do we align our perceptions with respect to future actions, and keeping track of like what we acted on in the past, even though this is not unique necessarily to active inference. There's B.F. Skinner and the history of behaviorism, and Pavlovian conditioning dynamics, which eventually gave way to, this is like the early understanding of reinforcement learning. So there is a lot of similar dynamics happening in reinforcement learning in terms of like, presenting a stimulus and like trying to calibrate how an agent, like there's a lot of experiments of rats and whatnot, and um, even teaching dog, training dogs, right? Conditioning a pet to do task. Um, we can think about this idea of like not just conditioning, but like, you know, I'm presented some aspect of my environment, navigating my environment, and you know, if certain aspects of the environment change, what do I notice? What do I ought to do over time? So active inference plays this um, role as a framework to allow us to pick apart how we engage with the world in terms of like how we see it that aligns with how we make decisions and conduct ourselves. So maybe that was a little long-winded. So I want to present a top each session. I'm going to present some topic that caught my eye that I think is worth addressing for people who feel they're in a conundrum where they're not doing as well as some other people in their lives, or they're looking for a way to gain leverage, right? This idea of like, okay, well, what can I do to salvage, how things panned out from the past and looking forward, right? In terms of putting myself uh, in a position where I have more leverage. Might have repeated the word leverage, but I think you guys get what I mean. And although there's a number of talking points, like talking about like for those who have access to technology, whether they have phone or computer, like we could talk about AI and best practices. But I thought that something more fundamental caught my eye because it seems I tend to, like people tell me like, oh, I feel like crap, da 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 da, and like, I'll have conversations with people. And, I guess my own life experiences where I felt like I had a hard time focusing on tasks, like the moments in my life where I had the hardest time focusing on tasks and having it together. I had this same pattern of behavior where I was eating I was eating bad food, right? Like, ultra processed food, frozen meals, mac and cheese, burgers, fat, especially when I was in university, I was like going to fast food trucks, getting gyros, French fries and all that stuff I should have been eating out at Chinese restaurants, pizza, especially when I went to a lot of collegiate or club or like student organization meetups, how they have pizza or IEEE meetings, stuff like that. um there's like all this. It's so easy to have access to the things we shouldn't have access to, that and then the worst part about the unhealthy eating is I've been doing it since I was a kid. I was enabled to do it since I was a child. And I guess I'm not going to get into my whole regimen, but uh, I felt like the one thing I really had to focus on because I had such a hard time getting everything else right in my life, was okay, well, what if I actually put all this effort, most of my effort into eating right, right? Sounds crazy. But I felt like I was in such a low in my life, um, roughly what, 7 years ago, that I decided, you know what? I'm going to start seeing how I could adjust my diet. And, it was like a gradual thing over time where I started eating canned food that was healthier and, little eating out and all that. And, and easing into doing meal preparation. So just budget eating, in terms of food groups and whatnot, just to get to the end of this because I don't think I have too much to share. But I really want to focus on like, promoting like budget healthy eating, and like just preparing food overnight, like doing, that way you get it out of the fridge, you have, already prepared food, whether it's a pot of beans you prepare, right? Like making sure you make healthy choices on terms of like, whether it takes long to prepare it beforehand, especially if you have a job and you have to go somewhere, you could just, especially if you boiled a pot of beans, right? Or you cooked some chicken or something overnight, right? You could just put it in a container to go with you. Um, I know one of the things about food preparation is it can take a little time, but I do think it's been a life-changing experience for me, like doing the food preparation, no gluten, no dairy, no added salt, no added sugar, no sugary drinks, no soda, no alcohol, nothing but like water. I mean, I like to take like a quarter of a like cut a quarter of a lemon and like squeeze it into a bottle of water periodically, like to flavor my water a little bit. But other than maybe 1 to 2 cups of decaf coffee a day, and if I have loose leaf tea, I'll have a little loose leaf tea here and there. Um, I just make sure no dried fruit, especially with the loose leaf tea, make sure there's no dried fruit in it. So I'm very, very antsy about adding salt and sugar and whatnot to my food, and that's been pretty going pretty well for me. 4 to 8 eggs a day. Eggs are very easy to prepare, so I scramble my eggs. And I like to put cinnamon and turmeric powder in my eggs too and mix it with that. Yeah, it's generally been what I've been doing dietarily. I know one of the problems with diet is like budgeting, and I think like if you really can't afford, if you're having a hard time affording uh healthy food, like you can, if you already are eating healthy, you could try and wait a little bit for your next meal. Like fasting's good. So if you wait a day, day and a half, uh as long as you know that you have been eating well, I don't think that hopefully not that many people are in that. I'm not in that situation yet, hopefully, but I get that healthy eating can be costly, but you know, I also encourage foraging for food, but I'm not going to get too into the woods for that. Maybe I could do another presentation on foraging for food, but um, I mean, in terms of healthy eating, and I could probably provide a link in the video description in terms of like, there's we have our gut is an ecosystem, so it's like, food is energy, right? And you don't want to put crude oil into the system and not put any good oil in there at all. So kind of think of it as like, you want to put clean, filtered oil into the tank, But anyway, um, yeah, I mean, the one, people have been asking, like, it's like, how have I been able to be on point, period, people are impressed with how I've been doing what I've been doing. And I tell them that my secret is like conviction to the diet, if the diet isn't the best thing that I can have going for me right now, I keep working on it. And once I got the diet right, you know, for me anyway, I understand other people, functionally they, maybe the food is not, that big of a deal for them. And that's great, and maybe, you know, if your budget's allowing you and the way you're eating is fine, then yeah, that's great, stick to it, but for me, I found out that, the diet is like the most important thing, at least for me. So I'm also trying to be mindful, as I finish this spiel, that, maybe diet is not important for everybody, but it was the most important for me. Uh, so there. We have Ryan here on the call with us. Uh, I know I gave a bit of a spiel. I don't think it was that long compared to most of the spiels I give, but uh, if there's something else you want to talk about, feel free. That in terms of like, you know, how do we deal with circumstances that uh, hold us back, and how we gain leverage.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Oh, like this whole idea of like we're in a position where we're at a disadvantage, and we're trying to do what we can to have the leverage that we need to keep going. That's what I was
Yeah.
that's what I was hitting on.
Would you like to talk about that?
Um, well, I gave a bit of a spiel, I wasn't, if there was like some
All
experience
right.
you went through that you feel like, oh, I gained something a lot from this. Uh, I don't know if there was moments that you feel like that you felt that, like, oh, this is a good experience I have to share, whether or not it relates to the topic point I brought up about dieting or not.
Yeah, so a lot dieting, I fast once a week and it helps with self motivation and discipline. I'm typically pretty gluttonous though. I need to lose quite a bit of weight, but one of the things that really helped me is not really like a concrete experience, but more just like a mindset shift. Is like when I was younger, I thought that someday I had to become like a millionaire and I had to travel the world and I had to be some sort of successful. I had a warped idea of success and I had really really high expectations for myself, and just accepting that I have a disability and I'm in a disadvantaged situation, and a lot of the things that I'm doing are actually like very hard, and I should just take the small victories. Like, for example, I sit down in my chair for a few hours a day and I do some writing. I do nothing but writing, and then I will go for a walk or something, and then I'll get some reading done, and then I'll basically play a few video games just to unwind after this. And it's very boring in the sense that it's just kind of repetitive, but it adds a lot of structure and meaning in my life because I used to feel like I had to rush through life and get the best and highest numbers, and now I'm just really satisfied watching things develop slowly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to reflect too, and like just like kind of like gouge like um gouge the perspective of how things are unraveling, instead of just like kind of jumping right into it, and if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know.
That, I think that's the whole point of why people talk about, oh, like meditation's great, but like really, like you don't really have to follow, you don't really, I think it's not about doing meditation necessarily as much as it's trying to figuring out a way that helps you, like some kind of strategy that helps you ground yourself in your thought process, that, and allows
Hmm.
you to transition between like priorities and like just how you manage your day. Yeah.
Well, I think meditation is super important, but I think also we shouldn't have a very narrowly defined view of what meditation necessarily is, if that makes sense. Like, what you're describing, these mindset shifts, um, not diving in right away, etc. Like those mindset shifts in and of themselves are meditation, and whatever resulted in them is a form of meditation. Meditation is basically just like therapy. Like you could do talk therapy is probably the most famous, just like the breathing meditation, focusing on your breathing is the most famous. But there's art meditation, there's going for walks, even your practice of keeping to a very disciplined diet sounds very mindful and meditative.
Yeah, and I guess it's like the way I look at it too is like, okay, like, I had this experience, and because I decided to take this action, right? Like I have this salience or of being aware of like how certain points of certain reference points or when frame reference frames of an experience comes together, right? That then reminds me why, motivates or incentivizes rather. It's like, okay, I'm doing this healthy eating because all of a sudden, like, I'm not having as much trouble getting started with my day or focusing on tasks, or I don't feel deprived of energy, right? There's like a number of things, I'm not foggy and, I don't have brain fog and all that stuff. Like, I'm not dealing with all these issues. I don't that I was dealing with, and like I don't have migraine headaches, like a lot of these problems that I was having problems with, like all of a sudden, and it was a gradual process for me. It's like, I couldn't like eat all like get the food prep and all everything done correctly overnight. It was like a gradual process of like trying to unlearn the things that made me feel undisciplined, right? Because it's like, we like are kind of like, we're like reward hijacked into that, right? But we want to unhijack ourselves, right? We want to, if that makes sense, right? So a lot of papers and talking about metabolism and stuff, they talk about like reward hijacking, metabolic hijacking, right? Like in terms of like, what like how cravings happen, the nature of cravings. And it's also not just about food, it's about like what gets our attention too, right? Like whether we're browsing social media or we're playing video games or, whatever it is that we're doing with our time, and how we manage it too. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, man, I completely agree that it's really important to unhijack the rewards. I'm just laughing because I'm very lax, very very lax with my eating. Some days I go more for calorie restriction than anything else, but I just basically eat whatever I feel like. So in that area, I'm kind of impoverished. But with my other habits, like my technology use and dealing with difficult emotions, things like that, I've sort of gotten very disciplined with. I mean, I do still play the video games, but I'm very intentional about it. Like the whole time I'm playing, I'm analyzing it from a game design perspective, imagining how I would write the game using like pseudocode. Just more from an analysis perspective than just an escapism perspective. And it's blocked out in specific times to just as during my break period to help me recharge.
Oh, that's good.
But
Yeah, I know some people really struggle with like time management and like when if they're a gamer. I know I struggled a lot when with time management myself. And I think it's like a
yeah,
motivation and incentive. issue, right? If like you're not in an environment where you're like incentivized to like want to do other stuff, right? As opposed to like more time playing the video game, you know?
Yeah, I I'm in a situation where I don't like what I do for quote unquote work. The work that I do is not a 9 to 5 grind, so it's not like I
Hmm.
am trying to escape from it and find something else. Like I very much enjoy the work that I do,
Mm.
and gaming just feels basically the same as that. Like it doesn't feel like I'm splitting into fun land versus serious land. It's like even playing a game, sometimes I have to psych myself up for a long time just to get the motivation to play a game.
Mm.
That's part of. I hate to go back and regress to the neurodivergent stuff, but that's part of autism. For a lot of people, at least for me, task switching, like because I'm such a
Yeah.
yeah, you know what I mean.
Oh, sure. Yeah. When you did a task for like one thing for like 2 to 3 weeks, and then like it's like, oh, now I have to go from reading for 3 weeks to writing.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
or
pretty wild. Or
even
doing an art
for
piece. I'm like, okay, now I'm doing art piece and I'm staring at the canvas for 3 hours.
yeah,
Yeah.
or like in when I want to play a video game, sometimes I'll think, okay, today is just like a day off. Today is just my leisure. I'm gonna play games, and then I have to sit there for like 2 hours before I even turn on the game, thinking, what am I gonna play? And then I go and analyze everything about the games that I have, and I just have to psych myself up for it. It's very hard. I get like a mental inertia.
Huh.
And in the morning before I work on writing, I have to, there's certain things I have to do. Like I have to drink 2 cups of coffee. Sometimes I have to take a shower first thing in the morning to get myself into the headspace. But there's like certain things that I have to do in order, like just to
Mm.
feel right doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, sure. Like
But
rituals. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Um, with your current situation, you come from outside academia, and academia is very challenging for you. Do
Yeah.
you find it hard to find collaborators?
It's
Harder?
getting easier. I so for me it was like finding the one person that wanted to spend that much time with me because from the get-go when I first joined the Active Inference Institute, it seemed challenging to get a feel of like who was working on what and like how not only how much conviction they had, but like the level of knowledge they had doing what they were doing and like how productive and constructive was it, not just for the institute, but also uh, for communities outside of the institute and just the dynamics of what's happening around us. It's like uh,
Yeah, the whole ecosystem.
yeah, I had to, like I try to strategic and I still try to like be strategic about evaluating who I'm working with because I do struggle with reading people's intentions and like that's a setback I have with like interacting with people in person, or people I meet in person
Yeah.
rather. Um,
Well, I know
it takes a
we
while
like
to do the song and dance kind of thing with people where I get to know them enough to see, okay, can I work with this person? get to
Yeah,
know them better, sort of thing. Yeah, yeah.
I would like to do a better on my part. I would like to hold my side of the deal a bit better and do another collaboration with you at some point because
Yeah, sure.
like I've I've been going through like just the last few years has been nothing but chaos, like homelessness, mental health and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But now I'm finally in a place where I'm like super comfortable and I'm working on my interpersonal skills and
Yeah, that's one of the challenging things. And we can have more follow-up conversation on that for sure. Um, I think, you know, when you're in academia, it's easier, but even when I was in school and, I didn't realize until like the end of my schooling, where I got my second degree, I didn't realize like how much I was struggling with the classroom dynamics and like this whole exam dynamic, compared to like my fellow students, like in terms of how they were engaging with the information, the same way I was, I didn't really understand those intricacies until like much later. And then I realized, oh, like, because I'm like trying to understand, like, wait a minute, like I could do research, but I can't do school. Like, what's happening here?
yeah.
Doesn't make any this like is this a contradiction? Like, like like I was wrestling with that a little bit. Um, you know, um, I will say, once you find that one person that wants to like that notices the potential you have and is willing to work with you like each step of the way, like they see that value. And part of that has to do with like giving that impression to that person, which is tough, like especially because I struggle a lot with the peer interaction thing. So, um, and then like, whether it's nice to have somebody like a career coach or like a career counselor or somebody. I struggled with that for a while, but maybe this time around I'm finally getting some help. We'll see how things pan out with that. In terms of like, it took a while, but I feel like I'm gaining traction with what I'm doing. It's just that the times are not so great, I mean, even people that are
What
in
do you
the
mean by that?
industry, even like people who are in the industry that are like,
Oh yeah.
I'm not an engineer, but like people who are engineers are worried now, right? Because like a lot
Yeah.
of people in management are like very overconfident about how these language models can do certain tasks, even though they're not really good at anything besides setting up a project. And even then, you really have to eyeball it, how you set it up. Or if you're like doing some creative work, like writing a paper or a story, like setting it up, that's the part where you might have the least trouble if you eyeball it. But once you're really deep into the woods of whatever project you're working on, it gets harder to like make sure the AI isn't screwing up. And I'm saying this because I'm really noticing people on LinkedIn, especially, say like, "Oh, wait, these models are basically constructing sandcastles," as a figure of speech to say that, you know, what the way that they're approaching tasks that you give them in these prompt engine environments, they're not really doing them effectively. Like there's problems like hallucinating and like the context windows of how they keep track of information, and the extent to that these models can understand semantics is also an issue, but that's getting into a whole can of worms of a discussion. But where what was I getting? at their I kind of lost track of why I was talking about the problems with yeah, right. So yeah, the way the economy is with even engineers, people that are in the industry doing enterprise work or consulting work of some sort as engineers or analysts, and they're working in it. I don't work in enterprise. I don't know if I can work in enterprise given like my competency because I'm a researcher. I'm not an analyst. I thought I would be an analyst. I can do some data modeling, but the way I work is not on the level of an analyst, really. Perhaps a research analyst, like a research focused analyst, maybe, but I'm a researcher, right? I look into information, I put insights together. That's basically what I do, and I put bibliography dumps together too. I try and make tier lists of papers I think are really important for certain categories and subcategories. So, I think it's
Yeah.
really important to because there's so much information out there. So like one thing I've been trying to do on social media, at least with my Substack, is like do this this info dumping of like not just bibliographies but metadata, like to help people search for information. I think that's really
Well,
valuable.
you know, I think I might be wrong, but if you look at the Dewey Decimal System, like in the 100 area, like 110, the whole 110 through 119 section is all bibliographies because those
Hmm.
used to be super important before people could just find resources on the internet. Like they would just
Oh
get
yeah.
like a list of books. And I think what you're doing is sort of keeping that torch burning, which is kind of cool.
Well, it's like there's so much stuff getting put out in machine learning and cognitive science and like these models they can't sift through the semantics, like the actual depth of really abstract concepts. Like they can't these models don't think, they're finding patterns where even if it is an abstract concept, if there are enough resources where it's getting the same if it's getting some kind of paraphrasing of the tokens that it's matching, that's why it seems almost as if you're having a conversation with a person because it's it takes the syntax the semantic structures, right? And it sees like what words are similar to other words, but then it's like you have problems with figure of like people speaking figuratively when they use words that mean the same thing and contextually they mean different things. So there's problems with the models. I wouldn't rely on these models to summarize information with confidence. Like you still have to skim through the papers, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I have a little bit of debate with my primary collaborator right now because like I can understand everybody, people are overwhelmed with like, man, like there's so many papers to go through and I need to understand this topic better. I want things broken down quicker for me. It's like, like if we really need to spend time
Yeah.
to learn something, then the AI is not going to be able to do it for us,
That's why I almost always read primary sources. Like,
Mhm.
I hate reading Wikipedia or like a book that's like a summary of the great philosophical thinkers because they're
Sure.
basically like cherry picking what they thought was important, but the whole point is to engage and like read the body of work and like synthesize something new from your own perspective. And you're just not going to get that from these AI models or from Wikipedia or anything like that.
Yeah,
And a lot of,
uh-huh.
oh,
Sorry.
sorry, I was just going to say, a lot of the sources on Wikipedia are flat out wrong. I'm a frequent Wikipedia editor, and one of the things that I do is I go when there's a little inline citation, and I'll go and I'll check the reference and try to find if it actually corroborates
Mm,
what's written. And a lot of the time, people are way too loose with what they consider as a reference. Like
yeah.
what is in the article is not anywhere in the text.
Hmm. Yeah, I could see that. And yeah, well, it gets into this kind of AI bubble issue when you're talking about like how people have too much confidence in the models and how the information is presented, and then it's not just about AI, but also like the algorithms that these platforms use to like sift through and present information to people, right? The nature of how these technologies and these platforms exploit rather than complement human behavior and the ecology that we live in, right? We're exploiting our ecology. We're exploiting our natural resources, right? So um, I guess that's getting more into collective adaptation rather than to how we each individually deal with our circumstances, right? We're thinking more about the bigger picture here, I suppose.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't have much to add to that.
No,
It
yeah, sure. What were you gonna say?
it reminds me of this thing. I really feel disrespectful and wish I would remember what it was called. No, Cognar, I think. That it is published by an active institute research fellow, and it's about getting hundreds, thousands, even millions of people to collaborate. But
Hmm.
it's just very, it's just like a footnote to what you said. You go on.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's I mean even because aside from the intern work I do here with the Active Inference Institute, I do volunteer work through Machine Learning Street Talk, and we have people within the Machine Learning Street Talk community trying to collaborate and put out like papers or work on projects and stuff. The people that want to work on more serious stuff together rather than pet projects. But I think it's, especially like given the dynamics of the ecosystem, it's important to have like groups of people that don't that you have these uh there's this terminology that doesn't go around too much called super chicken. I might have used that. You might have seen me throw that term super chicken. Um,
New to
basic,
me.
yeah. You have these big players that kind of manage like what's being regulated, or like they're the go-to person for some service, right? But there's other people that can provide that service, or certain feat they could provide that service in a way where there's better features of providing better nuances of providing the service through a different vendor or party as opposed to the person that's dominating the market, right? So this idea of super chickens, like, or even innovations, right? Not just thinking about a service, but like a product, or like maybe it's a scientific paradigm, right? Where people are kind of jumping a bandwagon on like, oh, we're gonna, you know, like large language models are a good example. Like, oh, we're working on these systems. Like, how much can we get out of them to do things reliably and cut down the level of effort that we put into the work we do, or complement or whatever, right? Like scaling how we work and whatnot, right? Like how all these companies that promote a product, or like, they promote efficiency, but what's that the cost of, right? And I think in terms of like when we're dealing with circumstances, we have to consider trade-offs. We have to consider like,
Hmm.
okay, well, we can maximize the use of this resource, but where, if we're not mindful of what's going to happen if we overuse that resource, what's going to happen? What are the ramifications to consider? We need to be more cautionary, how we move forward. And it's not just people that are at current, it's not just people that are like marginalized to a disadvantage, but people people who are doing well now, they could be, especially people who are engineers that do work in software, that they have to worry about keeping up with like, what they need, what they're expected to do working with AI, right? And the dynamics of the market are a little hairy because there's problems with peer review and science, and that drives a lot of important things. There's a lot of, but a lot more people are are more vulnerable now, especially people who are making a lot of money as machine learning engineers. They have to worry about, are they going to have a job in a year and a half or two, right? They're worried about like, going from another contract to another every 6 months, right? Some of them, a lot of people, some of them have 1 year contracts. Some of them have three month contracts or 6 month contracts, right? So, that's a lot for people to worry about, the dynamics of their work contract based on like what they're keeping up with, how soon how long their contract is going to be based on what they can do with the technology and how people perceive how long the work should take. You know, that's a lot to consider. So one issue I'm worried about is like kind of like oversaturation of like different sectors of the market, but that's all talking about economics. But especially people that are like thinking about, oh, well, maybe I should get into the trades. Well, there's a lot of people that are competing in the trades, right? So I think nowadays, I would say if you have confidence that you can hold a job doing X, Y, Z, and you can prioritize your life around that, do that thing, but you have to be exceptional enough at that thing to be able to keep doing it as you do other things in your life. Or, it's just you gotta be mindful of like, okay, what am I good at? What am I good enough at? And it's not just being good enough anymore. Like, given the dynamics of the economy and the different sectors of the market in terms of labor and supply and demand, like people, I think, have to be exceptional, even if it's customer service. I mean, as ridiculous as that sounds, most people don't. I have a lot of respect for people that do well in the customer service, retail, uh, areas, but it's like if you're not exceptional at what you do already, you know, I think now's the time people should prioritize like figuring out what they're good enough at and not just good enough, but like they can progress and like keep up with who's
But
doing.
if everybody is the exception, then who is the rule?
Well, it's not just everybody is the exception. That's there's no regulating factor here, or I don't think there's proper checks and balances. Uh, it's hard to have that conversation about economics when most people don't want to talk about economics. And when people want to talk about politics, they just want to talk about politicians. They don't want to talk about policy, you know, which is ironic. It's like, oh, let's not have a conversation about politics. But like, it's weird, like when anytime people have conversation about politics, most of the time, 90% of the time, at least in America, like people don't actually talk about policy in a constructive manner. Just leave that to the lawyers and the political scientists and the bureaucrats that probably don't know what they're doing. I don't want to condemn
Yeah.
them like on a Zoom call, but it's
Oh
like,
no.
what are they doing? um, I mean, I think we need a humanitarian focused way of, but also like an ecologically mindful way of like having policy regulations and talking about policy. Realize that like we shouldn't just squabble with each other. It's like we need to stop. We need to not act like baboons. Like I like to make this analogy of like we should eat more like baboons, but act less like baboons.
Hmm.
Because I think we have this. We're able to articulate ourselves a certain way. We have this ability to have technology and use natural language, which nothing else on Earth can use natural language besides humans. I mean, AI can process natural language, but it can't interpolate or augment natural language through complex reasoning. So that's a
Yeah, AI
big
is
hurdle for
unnatural
AI.
language.
Yeah. You said unnatural language?
That's what AI is.
Well, I mean, like it can process natural, well, like large language models in particular, especially can process natural language, but the issue is that they can't play with language. They're not able to creatively like take the structures of the sentences and the grammars and be able to formulate um, I don't want to say, I like to use the word pragmatic structures, like going, not just thinking about semantics in terms of like, okay, I have a sentence or I have a paragraph and like this is the tonality and it's like, okay, I have paragraphs, I have a story, how is it interpreted? I mean, I guess there's still a bit of a debate in the natural language processing and like linguistics community about like, well, I mean, we have a good idea that we know syntax has to deal with the grammar and the ways you have to structure it, but in terms of the semantics, there's different ways you can phrase the same thing. The tone might be a bit different, like the way it flows might be a bit different. But like with pragmatics, it's then thinking about the intention, right? So like, but then like, it's like linguists and people that do research in natural language processing, or NLP, to cut it shorter. They would refer to it as semantics. Like, okay, you're dealing with the tonality, and the intentionality as well, with semantic structure. So anyway, that gets into a whole can of worms, I guess. Um, but yeah, I think we went on for about an hour. I don't know. I mean, uh, I could get into a bunch of talking points which may kind of derail the session talk, what the session's about a little bit. I mean, it might relate to it in a way, but I think we're getting into a lot of talking points that are more big picture focused that less people will relate to. But
Yeah, so I guess I'll get going then if you're ready to wrap this up. I mean, I thought it was a good session.
yeah, yeah, it's been a good first session. I think we could definitely have more of a conversation about AI the next session. And I mean, we'll come back to dieting dynamics depending on. I mean that's always an area we can fall back on, like this idea of.
Try and see if we could get Kevin or somebody on here with us next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for joining. I appreciate it.
Definitely. You have a nice day, Jesse.
All right. Take it
Bye.
easy.